and welcome to RiskScout's webinar, Protect, Prevent, Prevail, a banker's guide to check fraud. We are so excited to have you joining us here today. Now, before we do dive into today's webinar content, let's roll through some quick housekeeping items. RiskScout will be sharing all of today's webinar resources, including the slides, handouts, and the recording in a follow-up email tomorrow, so be sure to keep an eye on your inbox. Our handouts today include some helpful content, including a copy of today's slide deck that you can follow along with. We want this session to be as valuable for you as possible, so we encourage you to ask any questions that you may have throughout today's session in the questions section of the webinar panel on the side of your screen. We will also be running a few poll questions throughout the webinar to better understand who all we have today joining us on the call, and your participation is greatly appreciated. For those of you that might not be familiar with us, RiskScout is a team of former bank examiners, BSA professionals, and fintech developers helping financial institutions grow and be more efficient and profitable. Through a full BSA AML suite and specialized market tools, RiskScout solutions increase revenue and decrease your compliance burden by unlocking new deposit streams and automating compliance workflows. We are funded and influenced by over 200 financial institutions through networks like Castle Creek, the Bankers Helping Bankers Fund, and Alloy Labs, and we're proud that 100% of our customers are referenceable. If you're interested in learning more about how we help community banks and credit unions every day, visit RiskScout.com and get in touch. In case you missed it, RiskScout recently announced a brand new comprehensive BSA AML solution. Our team has been working tirelessly to develop innovative and intuitive ways to solve common industry challenges in the realm of risk scoring, transaction monitoring, onboarding and due diligence, SAR and CTR filing, case and investigation management, and much more. And I'm excited that we are officially ready to share our solution with community banks and credit unions. If you would like to join us in taking the BS out of BSA, you can request a demo at RiskScout.com or answer the demo question in the survey following this session. RiskScout is also proud to share that this month we announced partnerships with two leaders in fraud detection, Q6 Cyber and SQN Banking Systems. Q6 Cyber specializes in monitoring the digital underground to catch compromised cards and accounts before fraud occurs, while SQN Banking System focuses on catching check fraud in real time to eliminate many institutions' primary loss driver. We are thrilled to partner with these fantastic teams and solutions to help community banks and credit unions better fight fraudsters, and I'm excited to partner with John today from SQN on this webinar to educate our audience on check fraud prevention. If you're interested in learning more about this partnership, get in touch and get a demo at RiskScout.com. Today's webinar is led by John Ravatia, Director of Sales and Account Management at SQN Banking System. John is a seasoned fintech executive with 35 years of experience in fintech business development, including 15 years of focus in fraud, risk, and compliance. He has worked with core processors, CUSOs, payments processors, and other technology firms to deliver forward-thinking, value-based solutions to institutions and partners large and small. We are very excited to have John joining us here today. And John, before we dive into today's agenda, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your work with SQN Banking Systems?
Absolutely, and thank you for the introduction, the kind words. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm excited to lead some interactive conversation with you all, but even more excited about our partnership with RiskScout. We're extremely pleased and excited moving this forward. SQN Banking Systems has been around for approximately 40 years. And those of you that deal with fintech companies know that's about 4 lifetimes. But for probably 2/3 of our existence, we were pretty much a singular product company. SQN developed and licensed one of the first signature storage systems available to the financial institutions in the United States. And we imaged signatures off signature cards and documents and made them available throughout bank enterprises. That same system is still being used by the likes of many top 5 or top 10 banks, all the way down to community banks and credit unions. So it's still out there and still functioning. But the last 10, 12 years, we decided that we needed to make our software slightly more dynamic. And so we started expanding the capabilities into document review, signature review off checks, transactional analysis, and so forth. And so we've come up with our fraud suite, and we almost everything we do is image based. So key point to remember with SQN and companies like SQN is our core competency is image extraction, image comparison, and anomaly recognition. So we bring that to the fraud detection process. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we got to this point of what I call epidemic proportions in check fraud, how we got here, the impact of the dark web. Ethan mentioned the partnership that RiskScout has with Q6 Cyber. They're a phenomenal organization. We too are partnered with them, and their ability to bring additional data to the process is unparalleled. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the dark web and how it has accelerated the growth in check fraud since COVID. And then we're going to talk also about how if you're not using technology or integrated technology, you're probably going into this fraud fight with at least one hand, if not both hands, tied behind your back. So we're going to talk a little bit about technology that's available in the industry, and how I won't say it makes your life easier, but it certainly will make your life a little bit less uncomplicated. And then we'll entertain any questions that you might have.
Excellent, and thank you so much for that, John. Yeah, that's right. We do, before we dive too much into how we got here, we want to ask our first poll question of the day. This should be popping up on your screen now. This is a quick question just to get a feel for our who all we have on the call today and the institution asset size. We've got a couple different tiers here because we know it can make a huge difference in the in how check fraud is treated or handled, or the resources available to purchase technology solutions. So we'd like to get a good understanding of who all we have joining us here today, so we can make sure that we're tailoring our content as accurately as possible. We'll give you all a couple more seconds to get these responses in. All righty, excellent. And we'll go ahead and turn that around. John, you should be seeing this on your screen. Looks like the most common tier that we're seeing of those that are attending our call today is there at the between 500 million and 1.5 billion. But that's not to be to overshadow the fact that a quarter of our respondents are under that 250 million mark. John, I'm curious, I know you've done a lot of worked with a lot of institutions, big and small. Does it surprise you at all, those who are showing up and interested in learning a little bit more about preventing check fraud?
It does not really surprise me. Check fraud, way back in the day, check fraud was a big bank problem, right? And the community bankers, the community financial institutions saw it that way. If I had $1 for every time that I've heard pre-COVID, we don't have a check fraud problem. We know our members here at the credit union, or we know our customers here at the bank, but that has all changed. So it doesn't surprise me. The vast majority of the asset size that we were polled is under 5 billion. And that's indicative of the fact that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here shortly, but just probably a lack of investment in technology because checks were supposed to go away, right? So, and you can see on this screen a little bit of the challenge that how we've gotten to where we are today. If you think about the pre-1990s, check growth was still booming. From the 1950s when Micro was starting to be put on checks all the way through to the mid to late 90s, checks were still a viable a source of payment. In fact, it still blows my mind to look at that statistic. In 1762, the first check was written. but check growth was phenomenal in the 80s and 90s. And then we hit into the 90s and we started to see a decrease in check growth. From 1990 to about 2018, 2019, 2020, checks were declining at about 5% a year. But check fraud attempts continued to stay pretty much level, maybe a slight increase. So the delta for a financial institution was getting greater and greater. But still, there was a lack of investment in technology. And some of the things that kind of drove check fraud to attempts to continue to rise in the 2010 to 2020 ranges, EMV. Back in 2010 and so forth, with all the data breaches, the Target breach, the healthcare breaches, and so forth, credit card fraud, debit card fraud was the predominant fraud channel. The advent of EMV drove a lot of the layman fraudsters back to checks from cards, and so it became a very easy fraud channel to perpetrate. It lacks multi-factor authentication. If you think about it, it's one of the few payment channels that you put a check in the mail and you might not know if it gets cleared or cashed for a week or two. So it's not a real-time payment. But COVID obviously changed everything. The banking industry was in a state of transition, remote work environments, the unemployment factor during COVID, the stimmies or stimulus checks, stimmies as they're called in the industry. It was a field day. There were more stimulus checks being written by the government. And of course, the government check is supposed to be good. So they were being cashed left and right. And so it created a market, a black market, if you will, the advent of many of the dark websites. Banks had invested their technology dollars in mobile and cyber and person-to-person. But over the years prior to COVID, there was really little or no investment into check fraud detection. So COVID really did change everything.
That's a good point, and I thank you for bringing that all out. Always interesting to see the history, especially to see just how far back checks actually go. Now, that does bring us into our second poll question, which y'all should see popping up on your screen. And this is asking just how much check fraud has changed at your financial institution within the past year, the past 12 months. Have you seen check fraud decrease, remain the same, increase, significantly increase, or you know what, it all happens, maybe we're just not sure? That's an option as well. We'd love to hear from y'all, for those that are joining the call, on what you've seen happen at your institution in the past year. Excellent, y'all are pretty quick on the draw today. Thank you for getting these responses in. We'll go ahead and turn this around. And actually, we've, unsurprisingly, 52% of the folks on the call today say that they have seen check fraud increase in the past 12 months at their institution. 19% have seen a significant increase. So that is an overwhelming majority that are seeing an uptick in check fraud at their FI, with only 14% saying that it's remained stagnant and another 14 saying that they're not quite sure. It could go either way. John, curious, were you expecting to see more? Were you expecting to see less? And are you surprised that no one is seeing a decrease?
None of this surprises me. It's a perfect bell curve. If you look at it, 14 and 14 on each end and 70+% in the middle. And if you look at this top statistic on the on this slide, 73% of financial institutions surveyed said they're experienced check losses. In fact, I saw a number the other day that's pushing that number up closer to 85%, and I still don't believe the 85%. I believe that number is almost exclusively well in advance of 95% of seeing an increase in check fraud, one way, shape, or form. So, those numbers don't surprise me. In fact, they're very consistent with what I expected. So a lot of data on this slide. I'm not going to go through all of this. I think this presentation is going to be made available to everybody, so you'll have this at your fingertips. But a couple of key points. We talked about the delta in check fraud, those $24 billion in losses last year. If you look at the fact that check volume has decreased or maybe a little bit leveled off during COVID, but check fraud attempts have gone through the roof. So it's no surprise that the numbers of 70+% are experiencing check fraud. Also, 59% of new account fraud is mule related. And this is really important to recognize because this is an organized crime, organized effort. And we're going to speak a little bit about how the dark web has precipitated that. But for those of you that have business accounts, this is not going to go away. 84% of the businesses that are surveyed say that they still prefer checks as their preferred payment vehicle. And this is a little bit staggering for those of us in the business because obviously commercial accounts write a hell of a lot more checks than personal check usage, and the dollar amounts are much, much higher. So for those of you that have commercial accounts, the focus, a lot of what we're doing is focusing a lot more on the commercial side of the business with some new technology. Digital encryption is becoming more and more popular of the data that's on the check. Positive pay. If you're not using positive pay, you should probably should have had that as a poll question. How many institutions are using positive pay? But positive pay will solve one piece of the problem if you're not doing the payee name extraction or comparing all the other data on the check too. So business accounts are continue to be a focus. So lots of good data on this slide. 24 billion in losses. It's increasing. And if you look at this particular information that's been put out by FinCEN, even though checks have been declining about 8% over the last 5 years, suspicious activity reports for checks have increased over 40%, and mail SARs have increased 57%. That's indicative of what's happening out there from the USPS mailbox thefts and so forth. But if you look at all the payment channels, it's only ACH and checks that have increased over the last year. So this supports the theory that it's here to stay and it's going to continue until we finally get to that point, if ever in our lifetime, that checks go away. So let's talk a little bit about what's driving this and what's fueling the fraudsters. The days are long gone of somebody stealing my wife's purse and her checkbook and getting a hold of a pad of 25 checks and writing 5 or 6 checks until we catch it. That still happens, but it's become much more sophisticated. The dark web has opened up a whole new avenue of perpetration here. And a lot of you probably know this. I'm assuming that a lot of you follow the dark web, but it continues to change and it's extremely powerful. I read the other day that recently there were within the last 5 months there were checks valuing $480 million in value that were sold on the dark web, and about 30 financial institutions in this country took hits of $1 million or more, and some of the top 10 banks took hits of over $10 million. That still leaves about $400 million of potential fraudulent checks floating around in the system. So how's this happening? You can buy the arrow keys or the master keys. You can buy checks for as little as $175 for a group of checks. If you move to the next slide, Ethan, you can even buy mail accessories. You can buy USPS postal employees' uniforms. Last year, 25,000 blue boxes were broken into in the United States. And some of the sites that we have monitored even offer money-back guarantees. If you buy checks on the dark web from that particular seller and the account's closed before you get your investment back, they'll refund your money or give you new checks. So it's big business. You mentioned Q6 Cyber. I did a presentation back in May to some bankers in 2 different states. And that morning, I had our partners at Q6 do a survey and a search of the dark web. And so this is just, and these were two relatively smaller states. None of them were in the hit city regions of Texas and Houston and Florida and New York. They were in some of the other smaller states. But in one particular state, there were 12,000 and change pieces of PII for sale on the web that day. And in a neighboring state, there were over 8,000 pieces of PII just in that particular day. And consistently, what we're seeing is about 60% or so of the PII for sale on the dark web is checks. So you can see how this situation, community banks, no matter where you're located, whether you're located in the big city of Houston or New York City or Philadelphia or Chicago, or you're in the Great Plains area or the desert, it doesn't matter. The checks are being sold all over. So it's big business. There's an organizational chart involved. You know, you have the perpetrators that are actually stealing the checks. You have the broker on the web that's selling them. You've got the forger. You've got the mule and the walkers. That's turned into big business. Speaking to a few bankers recently, they cringe on Friday afternoons because they cash a lot of payroll checks. And they said starting about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you can see the walkers lining up outside to cash legitimate payroll checks, or at least stolen payroll checks too. And to the point where it's gotten kind of predictable. So the marketplaces, some of them, as I said earlier, some of the marketplaces have 100,000 plus followers. Somebody told me not too long ago you can buy an ebook on the web for $2.95 on how to successfully commit check fraud. So if you're not prepared, you're fighting a losing battle.
All right, so before we get into a comparison on what different FIs are doing across tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, we would like to understand what y'all, our audience today, are doing and how you're handling check fraud currently. So you should see this poll question popping up on your screen now, and it is asking, how are you currently preventing check fraud at your financial institution? You can answer any of our 4 responses. That's everything from no review process in place. Maybe you're doing manual reviews. Maybe you have some technology or some amount of software, but maybe not a fully robust system. Or last but not least, maybe you have an integrated software solution, something that's fully robust and is really carrying the weight of your review process there. We'll give you all just a couple more seconds to give your responses, and then we can share them out and see what our audience is doing today to prevent and catch some of these fraudsters. All righty, excellent. Looks like we already have most of our respondents in. And looks like 75% of our audience has some amount of technology in place. That's great to hear. Now, that said, it's only 5% that have a truly integrated software solution, something that they feel is fully robust and really helping solve the full problem or the larger picture. 20% of our audience is doing everything manually. And John, good news here. Nobody is neglecting the review process entirely, or at least no one on this call. So I'm sure that's good to see. I am curious, John, how does that 75% with some amount of technology, how does that hit your ear?
It's not surprising. Probably the way to really answer that question would be to overlay the results of this graph with asset size, because we have found in the industry that there's certain tiers and levels of financial institutions that have upgraded to more and more technology. But the key is whether the technology that's being used is in a siloed environment or if it's integrated and speaks in concert with other software packages. And that gets more and more robust as you get larger and larger. And so I'll just shoot right to the bottom part of this slide. And it kind of exemplifies what I was just talking about. Tier 1 institutions have historically had, using enterprise AI, they've bought a number of different software packages with software development kits, and they've put them together and merged them together with as multiple point solutions to build solutions that work for them. And these are probably primarily banks that are 50 billion and above, 100 billion and above, and so forth, the tier 1 level banks. We found as you get into tier 2, there's software that many of those banks, most of those banks, 75% of those banks, whatever number you want to pick, are using point solutions. A lot of them are data driven. There's a lot of data, check fraud data providers out there. They're maybe using some image driven solutions, but a lot of point solutions, maybe a solution for signature, maybe a solution for document review and so forth. But when you get into the tier 3, which I would say maybe are 10 billion and under, we're still seeing quite a bit. We are, at least at SQN, seeing quite a bit of manual review, setting a dollar amount, maybe 5,000, maybe 20. We have one customer that switched to us that was only looking at checks over $70,000. I don't know that I've ever written a check that large, but so there are still quite a few institutions in the community financial institution world that are looking at checks manually, a certain dollar amount, doing a signature review, looking for obvious alterations on the document and so forth. And then if you want to go after lower dollar fraud, you've just got to throw more FTEs at it. So those numbers don't surprise me. And this is just a graph that articulates what I just spoke of. The manual process obviously is very costly. Usually the institutions that are doing it manually are still focusing on high dollar fraud, not looking at lower dollar fraud. It's a limited review process, maybe 1 or 2 or 3. Maybe if the fraud investigator is really, really good, they might go into the core system and look at the last couple of check numbers and compare. So it's very, very subjective. You get into maybe the tier 2 world or the higher tier 3 world. If you can go back just very quickly to that slide, you might be having a common review. You're automating the process. And then obviously the holy grail is to automate with the use of AI. Organizations like ours and others in this industry that have migrated to an AI machine learning platform, now we can look at the entire document. Now we can use technology as a partner. You can have one set of technology solutions that learns each of your customers as they go. This has in the past been pretty much used by larger financial institutions, but the technology is really moving downstream. And during a proof of concept that we did not too long ago, we found that when you combine image data along with data-driven solutions, transactional data, if you will, that including image data as part of the analysis improved the quality and effectiveness of the alert by almost 60%. So one solution alone is not going to solve the problem. Integrating and having solutions work together will. So what kind of technology is available out in the marketplace for those that either have technology solutions or are thinking about technology solutions? And think about a complete document review, image and data, as I just spoke about. Look for technology that does an automated signature review, not based against a signature card or a 20-year-old signature, but the most recently known good signature for John Revita is the signatures that should be reviewed. Companies like ours will extract those signatures off historically good checks and make them available as an automated comparison. Look at the complete document. Make sure that the technology that you use not only looks at fixed fields, but the variable information. This is what's really changing, and I'm going to speak to this here in the next slide or two, that what the fraudsters have become very good at is buying very good checks on the internet with good signatures, with good dollar amounts. And you can also buy checks now on the dark web that are already pre-washed. So the fixed fields that typically have been looked at in the past don't tell the whole story. you've got to look at the variable information too, the payee name, the handwriting analysis. Does the handwriting in the pay to the order of line match what the handwriting that's on the signature line that matches with the car law information, right? Has there been a change? The first opportunity to see if that check's been washed. And when all this software works together and generates an alert, do you have an effective workflow management tool that gives your fraud team all the necessary data available on one screen to make the best possible decision as quickly and as accurate as possible? In our particular case, without making this a sales pitch, a good trained fraud investigator can do 3 to 4 alerts or more a minute because of all the data that we provide them. So siloed solutions won't work. Systems need to be working in concert. So let me speak just briefly about some of the areas that you might want to look at if you're thinking about automating your check prevention technology. Look for solutions that not only look at the fixed fields. This is the information that's pre-printed on the document. As I like to say, you order a new checkbook, you get 100 checks that all look the same. The payer block, the pay to the order of line, the dollar line, the memo line, the date line, the courtesy box. Look for technology that's going to make sure that they can identify if there's been any alteration or movement. Is the type font in the payer block the same on the presented check that it is on all of the previously paid checks? Is it in the same location? If I'm going to counterfeit a check, or if I put the payer block, if I move it more closely to the center of the check, that's an anomaly. Does your software solution look for those kinds of anomalies? Okay, but now the trend has been to buy good checks. So now technology needs to get it to the next level where we're looking at the variable information. The fixed field is the same information that's on every check within the checkbook. The variable information changes from check to check. Who I wrote the check out to, the dollar amount, any information in the memo line. Does your software solution include handwriting analysis and handwriting comparisons? Do you have the ability to extract new payee names that John Revita's never written a check to before? And can your provider tell you that this LLC has now been seen as a fraudulent LLC in other institutions? And if so, did you get an alert so that you know that Bedrock Industries is not a good payee name for this particular account? So make sure that you're investing in some technology that's going to be able to look at the variable information, because that's driving more and more of the alerts that we're seeing in the industry. Same with signature analysis. I mean, the signature verification's been around for a long time, but is your solution dynamic enough? Can it handle multiple signers? Can it handle signing authorities on the commercial accounts? So another example of making sure that the technology is robust enough to look at the variable information, okay? And include this with your transactional data analysis. That companies like ours, this is the non-image, the duplicate serial numbers out of range, the customer behavior piece. How many checks do I write a month? How often do I write checks? What's the usual dollar range of the checks that I write? And does your automated solution include incoming deposits? Account takeover. If my normal behavior is two deposits a month, and I start depositing more frequently and withdrawing more frequently, am I setting you up for a $25,000 deposit and a $25,000 immediate withdrawal of a fraudulent check? So looking at the on-us checks or the in-clearing checks is not always a complete 100% foolproof way. Compare that with incoming deposits so that we can better understand the consumer behavior. And once an alert is driven, well, let me talk about alerts. We talked about the variable piece. Next slide, please. You know, historically, we talked about the fact that COVID kind of changed everything. And when I've gone back and had our team look at some of the alerts, that, you know, what are the alert types that we've generated in the past, found some interesting graphable information. You know, back before COVID, you looked at some of the transactional data, and you know that gray trend line, it started to increase, and a lot of that has to do with mobile deposits, duplicate deposits, and so forth. But it was still pretty consistent from 2021 to 2024. Same with the signature alerts. That's pretty much a flat line. Still important for forgeries, but now that the fraudsters can get a hold of good checks with good signatures, you know, you're going to still see alerts, but they might not be as great of an alert. And then you add some of the fixed check fields. You know, the fraudsters don't have to screw around anymore with changing the counterfeit check. They're buying good checks. But look at the graph, the yellow graph on the variable information. This is the alert type. These are the alert types that you really are going to tell the tale of the financial institutions that are going to stay ahead of the curve, or at least stay consistent with the curve on what the fraudsters are doing. It's not to say that the other alert types aren't important. They're extremely important, but it's going to change. So you need to be looking at variable data. This is the check washing piece that everyone talks about. So when your system generates an alert, do you have an easy to use manual interface or automated interface? And most companies, if they're doing a good job in the fraud prevention space, will have some kind of user interface where we're giving you the suspect check, the profile check that drove the alert. We're giving you the fraud reason codes. We're using a lot of color to make it easy for the fraud investigator to see the anomalies on the document as quickly and as accurately as possible, and to be able to make pay or no pay or pen decisions, all from one screen. Some other great technology features that are available in the market, if you go to the next slide, is being able to do signature reviews right on the screen. You know, can you pull up historic data in your system to look at other previously paid items, other signers on the account? Once again, having everything available at your fingertip to be able to make that decision. And some new features, which I think really are helpful on the next slide here, is the ability to do some overlays on the document, not only just signature overlays of the presented signature to known good signatures, but how about doing a document overlay? Now you look at this, if you look at the check on the user interface, it's pretty obvious that the check that was presented at the top doesn't have a border, where the check in the profile database that drove the alert does. That's pretty much, you know, you can make a decision just on that. But if you elect to do an overlay, you see an awful lot of additional anomalies on that presented check that's in the profile. Not just the border, the handwriting, the location of the payer block has been moved. You know, so there are a lot of other anomalies on that document besides just a lack of border. So if your technology can use overlays, it's a big plus in making your fraud team more effective. So a complete overlay, complete document review is really what you're striving for. And you can do this with a lot of point solutions, or you can find solutions in the marketplace that work in concert, that have every piece, every software engine available to be able to give you the most comprehensive review of the document between fixed fields and variable fields and signature and transactional data. It's all out there. You just have to elect, are you using it? Are you using it as a point solution, or are you using it as an orchestrated environment? Before we entertain questions, I want to go back to what we talked about with regard to positive pay and some of the challenges that that organizations are facing as it relates to commercial accounts. So from a positive pay standpoint, I don't know what percentage we said. 84% of the commercial accounts still prefer checks as their primary payment vehicle. It's going to be tough to pry those checks away from them. They've built their internal systems around it. But if you currently are using positive pay or reverse positive pay, are you using a payee name extraction software application that can extract the name off the check? A lot of companies in our industry will have the ability. Remember, we're an image extraction, image comparison, and anomaly recognition company. So if you're not including payee positive pay as part of your positive pay, it's hard to say that real fast. If you're not including positive payee name extraction as part of your positive pay solution, you might want to consider it. But there is some new technology in the marketplace too with digital encryption of the data. And these solutions for positive pay really streamline the process even further. They potentially eliminate the need for issuing files because the software interfaces with accounting systems at the commercial account. It's a print stream driver software application. So when I'm typing out my payables, I'm capturing all the information on the face of that check, and I it gets printed on the printer that encrypts all that information in that digitally encrypted barcode. And then software at the financial institution, when that check clears, or if you have an API that makes it available at the teller window or an ATM, wherever you can capture the image, software can extract the information out of that barcode and do an automatic comparison. Remembering what I said before, companies that are worth their weight in gold in this industry can do image extraction, image comparison, and anomaly recognition. So extracting the data out of that barcode and doing the comparison, it's a pass or fail environment very quickly, with no need for the issuing file, although it will generate an issuing file if you still need it. So if you go to the next slide, these are some of the areas that digital encryption will capture: the payee name, the dollar amount, the check number, the issue date, routing and account number. But it also captures audit information, and litigation attorneys love this: the employee ID that printed the check, the date and time the check was printed, and it can even capture the laser printer identification number in that barcode. And as a byproduct of this digital encryption, we've also found that just having that barcode on the check is a fraud deterrent. So in summary, if you want to win the battle, you have to have either multiple solutions that talk to each other, or technology solutions, in my opinion, technology solutions that work in concert. And you got to look at multiple areas of the document, and I think ideally it should be built on a machine learning platform so that every time your customer has a new nuance to their document, it's learning from that review of that document, so you don't have to constantly be staying up with fraud trends. The system's going to do it for you.
Excellent. John, thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. Now, the good news is we do have time for Q&A, and we have gotten a good amount of questions here. So we'll dive into all of that shortly. But before we do that, we have our final poll question of the day, which you should see popping up on your screen currently. And this is asking if you would like to get in touch with RiskScout or SQN about any of the following options. This poll question is, of course, optional, just like all of them. You can select as many or as few responses as possible. But this is the easiest way to get in touch with us here at RiskScout to learn about that new BSA AML solution we talked about, or to learn a little bit more about the solution that SQN provides that John has talked about a little bit today to start stopping those check fraudsters in their tracks. So if you are interested in getting in touch, please go ahead and give us one of those responses. John, while we do have this up and we're letting people get some answers in, We had a question today asking that they said that they're currently doing all manual reviews because they just don't have a huge budget. And if they were able to find a budget to get a solution, they imagine they would unfortunately only be able to get one of those siloed offerings simply because there isn't that much to, there's not enough money in their budget currently. If that's the case for one of these institutions, what would you recommend being that first siloed solution that they should start with before they follow the path down and eventually get a more robust solution?
There's a lot of questions within that question and a lot of answers, but let me do my best here. I would say probably your core provider offers some kind of signature verification system already. So you might be able to cobble some of the signature verification out of some things that you've already got. But I think there's a misnomer that systems like what you saw are expensive. They can be. I've seen them run 6 digits. I can only speak from our perspective at SQN that a system that handles document review, signature review, user acceptance on a subscription basis can be as little, depending on your volume, as little as $1,800 to $2,000 a month. And we have found that our customers will tell us that the system pays for itself 5 to 6 times over just on workflow improvement, being able to look at all of your documents, just not the high dollar documents. And then you add the fraud saves on top of that. It's really easy to build a return on investment model that says that the suite is the way to go. Having said that, I would, if I were doing it and I only had one software engine to look at, knowing what's happening in the marketplace, I would go for the document review. Signatures are really important, but as you remember from that one slide with the variable information going through the roof on that grid, you're going to have, I think, to stay ahead of the game, or at least stay with the game, you're going to have to look at the variable information and the document, the fields on the document itself. So I would say, in our case, it's called Century Inspect, but if you're looking at software, I would look at document review first.
Thank you for that, John. I know, like you said, definitely a complex question, but I hope that answered our audience's question there. Now, in your answer, you did actually allude to another question that we had come through that was asking about justifying ROI and if there's a template or something that you might recommend for showing that potential ROI to a leadership team to help justify that, since we are in budget season here. Do you have any recommendations for that, or is that maybe something that you have a resource that we can include in our follow-up emails that will go out tomorrow morning?
You bet. Recognize I work for SQN Banking Systems, but we have ROI models that we've put together with several community banks, ranging in around the 800 million to $1 billion plus range. And that's where I came up with that number of 6x just on workflow improvement. If you're looking at high dollar amount, but your fraud's down here, you have to look at all of those checks. We look at every check that your customers present on us checks in your in-clearings. But to review those things manually, you're going to have to probably add 3 or 4 times the amount of FTEs depending on your volume. So we do have ROI models that would suggest 6x on return. Then you add the fraud on there. Typically, most of our customers will tell us that the return on investment is somewhere between 10 and 13% of their investment and the monthly subscription to run the software. We have business cases that we'd be glad to share too, and I'd be glad to help you. I can put you in touch with Nolan Jasler, our director of marketing. He can help you with some case studies. We'd be more than happy to help you. But yes, there is information available to help build the business case.
That's excellent. Thank you for that, John. And for everyone that's on the call here today, we'll be sharing John's contact information here in a moment as well. So if that's something you'd like to follow up with him after the fact, I would definitely encourage you to do so. We had another question coming in saying that they're a smaller bank that has gotten advice that they should look into providing trainings to their customers at the bank to help try and mitigate some of this check fraud risk. Have you had any success there, or do you have any advice about providing those trainings?
I couldn't agree with you more that, typically, at least in the community bank world, the responsibility seems to always fall on the bank. But consumers, there's been enough publicized in the news and in the media about all the mail theft and everything else that there is an education process, not just at the branch level, not just in the fraud department, but bank-wide, but also with the consumer. And I've heard of a number of institutions these days with regard to positive pay that are promoting positive pay to their commercial accounts and even charging them for it. And if the commercial account doesn't want to use positive pay, then they're written into the agreement. If you're not willing to help eliminate some of this fraud, then you're on the hook for it. That's a little stiff arm, but theoretically it makes sense. I will share with you, as part of the answer to that question, a little research that I did with one of the states that we have an association with. I was getting ready to present on a similar subject about what can we do from a training standpoint. I researched 20 banks in that state, and I went to their website. And out of those 20 banks, 18 of the 20 had a fraud tab on their website. But ironically, none of those 18 had anything to do with check fraud. They had romance scams. They had Better Business Bureau scams. They had all the sexy scams out there, but none of them talked about how to protect themselves, how to have the customers protect themselves from check fraud. So I totally believe that this is a multifaceted approach. There is not one size fits all. Technology is part of it. Bank training, every individual in the bank, every department. This is a compliance issue. This is an operations issue. This is a branch issue. This is a customer issue, as well as a fraud department issue. So whoever asked that question, do it.
That's great. Thank you so much, John. That's great. I'm definitely understand. Yeah, I know some of those, as you put it, sexier scams can sometimes get a little bit more of the spotlight, but definitely something that we still need to be educating our communities on. So definitely well put. I think we probably got time for one or two more questions here. As a reminder, even if we aren't able to get to your question on today's call, we do still recommend that you go ahead and submit that in the questions tab of that GoToWebinar panel on the side of your screen. Because even if we aren't able to answer it live today, or we need additional information to follow up, we will make sure that we do that so we can get you the answers and the resources that you need to be as successful as possible. That said, we did have another one that came in, and John, that asked if you have any advice for outlets or good ways to keep up with the latest check fraud schemes and prevention techniques so we can try and stay ahead of the curve on an ongoing basis. Do you have any advice or for news outlets or maybe publications to subscribe to?
Yeah, I was just at the ABA conference, ABA Financial Crimes Conference 2 weeks ago, and they've introduced a couple of websites. I think the one is called, it escapes me now, but they have one or two websites there that at the ABA site. I'll make sure you get them, Ethan, and you can put them in the response. But yeah, the ABA's got some great information available. There's also some consortium models out there that talk about check fraud and what's available. I'm always skeptical of consortium models because unless you have penetration in your particular market area, it sounds really good, but I'm not quite sure if a check's good or bad, 1,500 miles away. And now the scams are a little different piece, but a lot of those scams are overall fraud scams, not just check fraud scams. But I would start with the ABA.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Now, y'all, that is all of the time that we have for today for questions. Like I said, if we weren't able to get to your question, if you'd like to get in touch, we still recommend that you go ahead and submit that, and we'll be sure to follow up with you after today's session. I want to give a big thank you to everyone for joining us today, and particularly for John and for SQN for taking the time to share some of their expertise here with us. You can go ahead and grab this contact information that you see on the screen. If you'd like to follow up with myself, Ethan Kratt, or with John here, we would be happy to connect with you, talk a little bit more, and dive a little bit deeper into anything we talked about today. So definitely encourage you to do that. We would also say go ahead and keep an eye on your inbox, as we will be sending out the recording slides, some of the resources that we just talked about during this Q&A. Well, that should be in your inbox tomorrow morning. There will also be a brief survey following today's webinar as you close out, where you're able to provide us with a little bit of feedback and even some additional requests for future webinars and future content that you'd like to see down the road. So would greatly appreciate if you take a moment there to share your thoughts with us. And of course, if you do have any additional questions, or if you want to learn more about RiskScout, or if you just want to stop by and say hi, you know where you can always find us at riskscout.com. We hope to see you on the next webinar, and thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody.